Hey everybody, welcome back to a fresh new edition of Building Bridges, the podcast of Standing Together, and I'm your host, Greg Johnson. We have not done a Building Bridges podcast since November of last year, so if you've wondered where we've been processing and kind of taking some time off, but we're back and we are in studio, a brand new studio that we're really excited to be at today, and we're going to let you know who our special guest is because we wanted to come back to the podcast, platform that we've had and continue to build our audience by kind of hooking up with a really wonderful friend of mine, a dear brother in Christ, who is the senior leader, the senior pastor of the Mountain Church, Ken Kruger. So, Ken, welcome to Building Bridges, the podcast of Standing Together.
Awesome. Great to be here, Greg.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. So I'm your first guest in this new iteration of your podcast.
Yes.
What an honor.
We did one iteration, then Jill joined me for about 2 years.
Right.
And that was Building Bridges with Greg and Jill. The first one was Building Bridges with Greg.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's just Building Bridges.
Okay, fantastic.
So, audience,
I love it. I would say with Jill gone, the attractiveness of the podcast has definitely nosedived.
It's a decline.
But you're doing the very best you can, and I support that 100%.
We work with what we got. And we are actually I'm just going to do a shout out here. We're in a brand new studio that the Mountain Church has just created.
Yes.
In your renovation here at the church. That we are privileged to be able to take advantage of and to be a part of. So I think it's altogether fitting and proper, as Abraham Lincoln would say, that because we just went to Gettysburg,
Very true.
And we just had that chance because that's a line that he uses in the Gettysburg Address.
There you go.
It is altogether fitting and proper.
Right.
But I thought it would be proper that you and I should do the inaugural podcast together. Your studio, your church, me, us. It all works.
Awesome. I love it. Like I said, I'm honored, man. So great.
So what we thought we would kind of have a conversation is kind of a rebrand, a restart of our podcast is to just connect with someone like you as a pastor in the greater Salt Lake City area. You have the unique insight of one not who only is a senior pastor, but who has been an associate pastor at this church. Mm-hmm. And prior to that was a child of this church, with your father being the pastor for 30 plus years.
Yeah, 30 years, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or is it 30?
Let's see, he retired right at 30.
Okay.
Maybe 31.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of roll back for a second. We'll just kind of take this in piece. So how did your family come to Utah when your dad became the pastor of then what was called Mountain View Christian Assembly of God? Now it's called the Mountain Church.
Yes.
So where'd you come from, and how did you get to Utah?
Yeah, great question. My parents both grew up in Cleveland. They're kind of like childhood sweethearts, went to the same German Assemblies of God church in Parma, which is kind of a suburb of Cleveland. And then Dad went to Southeastern College in Florida, my wife's alumni. And
Alma
mater. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Thank you very much. I knew I had that wrong. Like, it's close though. Some of my alumni. I'm their alumni.
Yes,
but so he was a youth pastor first in West Virginia.
I can't even imagine your dad being a youth pastor. He's just not. It's not his shtick.
He would say that God anoints you for the season that He calls you.
Okay.
And I think that anointing went away pretty quickly when he was done with it. So a lot of people who know Dad would say exactly that assessment right there. But I'm sure he was a great one. It was before I was born. By the time I came along, he was or shortly after I came along, he became a lead pastor of a small AG church in West Virginia. Yep. There was a deacon member that got transferred from his small church in West Virginia to Salt Lake City, and then around that time, in between there, he had started attending Mountain View. Jim Ayers had planted this church, and then he went on to pastor a church in Colorado, so they were looking for somebody, and this guy who was a former deacon of my dad's started hounding. He wasn't even in leadership here at the time, but he started hounding the search committee and saying, I know of this guy, this young upstart in West Virginia, you got to call him, just to get him off their back. The head of the search committee called Dad just to be able to say, I called him, stop bugging me about it.
Yeah.
And the stars just aligned.
Yeah,
Everything
yeah.
fell in place. They brought mom and dad out a few times to interview, then to be voted on by the members. And so we came out here in 1988. I was just turning
Okay.
11 years old.
Okay.
So I was in West Virginia until then, and then came out here in '88. And the only time I've ever been away from the state is to go to a four-year college and then 2-year seminary-esque Bible program, both in the state of Florida. And after graduation, moved back here in '05.
Okay.
And have been on staff. My 20th anniversary working for this church was just a few weeks ago.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, a young kid from West Virginia, born in West Virginia.
Born in West Virginia.
With your dad being the pastor there, he tells you and your sister Angie, guess where we're going? We're moving to Utah.
Yep.
And you probably didn't even have a concept of
None whatsoever.
what a Utah was.
Of course, I was a product of the West Virginian educational system, so there's something to be said about that. But I remember
Which is stellar.
looking at it, which was phenomenal. I'm sure that's where I was going with that. That's the context. Is
the brightest people in America are coming. Now, I just got in trouble, but, yes.
We can't air this in West Virginia.
Just kidding,
So,
West Virginia.
West Virginia, we love you.
Yes.
I'm a product of you. We love
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Regardless, I remember going to my 5th grade class that day, and they had a big map of the United States.
Okay.
And my parents had told us that morning, if memory serves, I think it was a Monday morning. And it was before we'd gotten, or they'd gotten voted in here, so there was just a strong possibility we were moving. And I remember going and sitting in my elementary school class and going, Utah. I was hoping it was right next to California, because Disneyland, of course.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, we're one away from California. So no, I had no concept of what Salt Lake City was or Utah was.
So let's talk about you guys arriving here. The church is kind of not terribly old. It's what, I don't know exactly when it
10?
started.
I think it was 10 years at
10
that point. Yeah.
Kind of after a building project that had just been semi-completed or near completed.
Sure.
And you get here, congregation's not probably terribly large at that time.
I would, 200, somewhere around there. Yeah.
So Pastor Zig Kruger comes, and you're living in Utah. How long does it take for a 10-year-old, is that how old you were?
Yeah.
A 10-year-old kid who's not LDS to figure out, wow,
We're not in Kansas anymore?
I'm not in the majority anymore.
Yes.
I'm not in AG Central here.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't, I don't know how West Virginia was, but there was probably a lot more fellow evangelicals and born-again Christians than here.
Yeah.
And when you get here, 37 years ago, this has got to be a brand new world and kind of a like, where did we just arrive?
Absolutely.
Was it stark right away, or did it take some time to figure out this is a different place?
Both. There are certain things that were stark right away. I remember the going away party that churches will always throw, leaders when they're leaving, and one of the deacons getting up on that Sunday night that we're having this soiree and saying jokingly to Mom, "Now, Judy, are you sure you're the only one? Are there more wives out there that Pastor Zig is moving for?" And the Utah joke that everybody in the room laughed at, and I'm like, "What?
Yeah.
What's going on?"
Yeah.
So I knew there were some differences there.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I fixated on and being told about Utah was there's so many kids.
Yeah.
And I've always been a bit of a social butterfly, and in my neighborhood in West Virginia, I was like, ringleader of 30 kids, man. I mean, to be out until the sun sets every summer night was not unusual back then. And so we move out here, and I remember riding my little BMX bike up to a group of boys around my age and just saying, "Hey, guys, I'm Ken. Just moved in. Let's hang out." And so excited to be here. And the ringleader of that group looks at me, and this guy was like, he was a nemesis for the full 2 years we lived in this neighborhood. He goes, "Did you move into that white house over there?" And I said, yeah, that one right there. He goes, "My dad says your dad is sent from hell to deceive people."
Wow.
And just holds my gaze, and I'm like, what is going on right now?
Yeah.
And they rode off from me calling me names.
Yeah.
So it was the things like that. It was like, I'm not in, the north of the Bible Belt anymore.
And I want to pause here for a second, because we pride ourselves in having a mixed audience.
Absolutely.
A mixed religious audience.
I'm glad. I want you to bring balance to this, because I would.
And our LDS friends who might find us, again, we had a little sabbatical from the podcast, but we want them to understand, and I think many Latter-day Saints living in Utah, particularly 40 and older, 50 and older, would understand that the 80s were very different than today.
Very.
And to be an outsider coming in from West Virginia, being a born-again Christian, being a evangelical Christian, being the son of a pastor in Sandy? I don't know where you live.
Yeah, it was Sandy.
In Sandy.
Yeah.
And identifying yourself to an LDS group of kids
Yes.
who would not know anything about you or your faith
Right.
unless some parent had told them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As in the case of this young man's statement that my dad told me
Yeah.
that your dad
Yes.
is going to hell.
Yes.
He's a false
Yeah.
preacher. He's a false religious man.
Yes.
And what a shock! And then you get totally alienated. You get you get driven away from, and
Sure.
and you're not going to be our friend, you know.
Yeah.
And as a 10-year-old kid, that's a story that makes every Latter-day Saint I know
Yeah.
feel bad.
Absolutely.
That was ever the way it was.
Yes.
And sometimes we return the favor, particularly. I have a friend that I'm just getting acquainted with, starting to, we hope to have him and his co-star on a upcoming podcast. But he grew up in Tennessee as a Latter-day Saint. And he said, Greg, I cannot tell you how often I was made fun of
Yeah.
and picked on by
Yeah.
kids and the pastors and all the youth pastors that, when they knew and they
Yeah.
found out, they would make comments
Yeah.
in front of me, not behind my back.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah.
So it was hard for a guy that's probably in our age range to grow up in Tennessee in the gospel, in the Bible Belt, as a Latter-day Saint.
Yeah.
As much as in the 80s and 90s, a lot of
Right.
non-LDS kids were struggling.
Absolutely.
And I think that's just a historical fact. That's not to offend anybody, or it need not offend anybody.
Yeah.
And we need not hold on to that either. I mean,
Right,
what was done
right.
20 or 30 years ago,
Yeah.
even if it was part of our childhood experience,
Yeah.
to hold on to that and just be bitter or angry towards our LDS friends or vice versa to evangelical friends.
Absolutely,
One of the
Greg.
coolest
Yeah.
stories I had in the work that I do with Evangelical Latter-day Saint Dialogue is we were bringing college students to have a conversation up in North Ogden, and a stake president asked a singles ward bishop to host us, and he really pushed back, apparently. And I learned later from the stake president that he was so nervous about having evangelicals in his ward talking to his single young adults ward or congregation, because he was a missionary in the South and had gone through some very difficult experiences as an LDS missionary
Yeah.
in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm telling you, these are horrible people.
Yeah.
And I don't want them in our church.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to have anything to do with them.
Yeah.
I have never looked back since my mission because they were so mean and terrible to me.
Right.
And at the end of that night, this guy literally comes over, and this is probably a good 15 years ago. He literally comes up to me with tears in his eyes, and he says, Pastor Johnson, I have to tell you, this has been one of the most healing nights of my life. And I
Amazing.
said, why? He said, well, as you know, I didn't even want to do this tonight because you evangelicals terrify me
Yeah.
from my experience on my LDS mission when I was a young missionary in
Right.
the Bible Belt. And they were so mean and so nasty to me that I have no good thought about evangelicals.
Wow.
But tonight, you convinced me that things can change, that you are wonderful people, you love God, and your students were fantastic.
Yeah.
I think our kids learned a lot, and I learned a lot.
Praise God.
And I'm going to, tonight is a night of forgiveness
Yeah.
and a healing
Awesome.
and a fresh start for me.
Awesome.
So that was happening probably from the early 2000s forward. I think we
Yeah.
can say that was
Yeah.
beginning to happen.
Very much so.
So,
Yeah.
you live in Daybreak. You have two little ones.
Yep.
I think are roughly five or six
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. One's 6, just turned 6. My son
Okay.
is going to be 6 in October. Yeah.
What kind of experience do you think they're aware of as young kids living in Daybreak? Dad is
Yeah.
a pastor.
Yeah.
Is their world night and day difference from your world?
Yes.
Of 1987?
Yes.
Or how would you look at it and anticipate it for them?
Yeah, they're clearly younger than I was then.
Yeah.
But our experience as a family is vastly different. Let me share this with you. My wife, we've been married for I'll be 17 years in January,
Okay.
and she was raised in Florida, and that's when we met when I was going to college down there. And then we got married in 2009, and so she's lived here ever since. And so I'm filtering, everything I tell her about Salt Lake City through my lens, and might I say, my experience with the LDS people has been vastly different than that first encounter.
Okay.
I even brought up that story to say, there was some culture shock in the beginning,
right.
just like your friend who would say, listen, I serve my mission in, the Bible Belt, and the evangelicals are horrible, and we would distance ourselves from that behavior.
Yes,
I know that 99% of the LDS would distance themselves from the behavior of that 10-year-old.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware of that. But I'm telling my wife, this is my experience growing up here, and things have shifted a lot. And I've got great friends who are LDS people. I admire them. I love them. My life is richer for them being in it. And maybe 2-3 years ago, she teaches piano in our neighborhood. So there's a lot of families that she's involved with, and she's known as a pastor's wife that lives out there. And so she gets invited to a Bible study led by a bunch of LDS ladies in our neighborhood.
Okay.
So I say to her, in all my vast and revealed wisdom and knowledge, I say, okay, sweetheart, I'm just going to give you a word of caution here. They're proselytizing you. You'd be a big get for the LDS community in our neighborhood, the pastor's wife.
Right,
okay, so just, I'm saying, go into it, just, have your guard up. I could not have been more wrong.
Yeah.
They have been loving. They have been very curious about her context of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
They've been fascinated even by the way she prays, things like that. And some very, very legitimate and deep friendships have come from that group. Matter of fact, tonight we're going on a motorcycle ride, me and Christine, with the bishop and his wife in our neighborhood. And not for the sake of, evangelization. There's always an element of that in our interactions, but because we love them and they love us.
And that, to our viewing audience, wherever they may be from, near or far, that's the story that we want to celebrate.
Exactly. Yes.
And the fact that we have come from such a polarized culture in Utah, and understandably so, just like in the Bible Belt, just like in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. If you weren't evangelical, if you weren't Pentecostal, if you weren't like in Louisiana, if you're not Catholic in certain parts, you don't have a right to exist almost.
True.
What kind of weirdo are you?
Yeah. Right.
But in our divided states of America, where we just hear constantly about our racial division and our economic division and our political divisions and our religious differences, we're seeing here in Utah an evidence of two faith groups that in the past had a lot of tension for one another.
Yeah.
And you don't come into Utah without experiencing the way it is here.
Right.
We run it by our rules. We do it with our way, and you have to kind of just come under that.
Right.
Vice versa. Being in some other location where a Latter Saint might encounter that kind of attitude and whatever.
Right, yeah,
So
very
Utah
true.
is doing something right.
Yeah.
And I want to say, and I knew this man personally, President Russell Ballard of the LDS Church. He was the president of the Quorum of the 12 before he passed away a couple years ago. And he gave an address in General Conference. I believe it was in 2003 or 6. I think it's 2003. And any LDS person that might be watching can check this out. You can check it out on YouTube. Just put General Conference Russell Ballard 2003. And it was called How Do I Love My Neighbor, or something like that.
Okay.
And I knew him well enough that I had the chance to talk with him years later from this. And I said, I think there was a kind of turning point, because that General Conference talk, while it went out to the whole world of the LDS Church, it really was kind of a message for the Utah Latter-day Saint community. And he focused in on three things. One, their language. He said, we have people that come into our state and they don't know our language. When we say a steak center, they think a restaurant. We think of a compilation of wards. You know?
Yeah.
If we say wards, they think hospital. Or something like that.
Yeah.
And we're talking about individual
Churches.
units, church units,
Yeah.
and other things about missions and tithing or whatever, the temples and all the other buzzwords or the words that are kind of predominant in our LDS culture. He said we have got to use more careful language so we don't make people feel like we're talking a different language.
Yeah.
So explain yourself. That was one thing. And then he said, we've got to stop calling ourselves, at that time, the LDS Church used to more clearly refer to itself as Mormons or Mormonism.
Yeah.
They don't prefer that anymore under President Nelson. But nonetheless, this concept of Mormon, he said, we tell people, we often describe people as non-Mormon in our church.
Okay.
And that's not really very nice. That's not very appropriate. Because if somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, hello, President Ballard, I hear that you're a non-Baptist, or a non-charismatic, or a non-Assemblies of God."
Sure.
I would find that weird. I'd want to be defined by what I was, not by what I wasn't.
That's a good point.
And we have kind of taken a more arrogant point of view to kind of define people as against us.
Yeah.
We are the thing and everything else is up. So he said, we got to stop doing that. We have to call our friends of other faiths members of other faiths.
Yeah.
Oh, what faith are you? And not define them by non-Mormon or former Mormon or ex-Mormon or whatever. Yeah. And then the third thing was, he said, we are a people that have been historically persecuted and moved from one city to another historically. True. And under duress?
Yeah.
Under duress.
Alma mater,
It wasn't fun.
Right.
And I hear that sometimes we alienate people in our communities. We don't let our children play with their children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I'll tell you what, you cannot make me more angry than for me to hear some Latter-day Saints saying to a non-LDS person, a person of another faith, if you don't like it here, you could always leave. And so he kind of tackled these three big categories: language, definition of identity, and if you don't like it, leave.
Yeah.
And I felt, and I told President Ballard this, I think that's when I began to see an LDS shift beginning.
Yeah, back then.
A little bit, yes, as early as 22 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't comprehensive. It wasn't immediate.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, and there's not a person listening to us that wouldn't remark or acknowledge that contemporary Christian music, The Chosen, you and I both have had the privilege of visiting The Chosen set here in Utah with Dallas Jenkins. We see that TV series about the life of Jesus has brought a lot of Latter-day Saints into a similar space with evangelical Protestants and Catholics and people that aren't even believers.
Yeah,
that just
absolutely.
love the show. Or contemporary Christian worship on Caleb or what is it, Air One?
Air One.
Yeah, various places, or certainly going to Christian concerts that are coming to Utah more abundantly now.
Yeah.
And I think that Latter-day Saints are intrigued, not... I mean, usually a lot of times intimidation is based in fear.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It may look like it's bravado, and it may look like it's a attempt to squash others, but I really think it's fear. What you don't know, you're afraid of.
Agreed.
And so, who are these evangelicals who are afraid of them?
Yeah.
And vice versa, we did the same. But I think increasingly, and to our credit, and I think your kids are the beneficiaries. I've raised all my kids. My my youngest child is 19. We're empty nesters now, but you still got a few years.
Yeah, a bit.
good 10 to 15.
Yeah, yep.
Where you're going to have to navigate for them some of these unique things.
Yeah.
So while things are much better, as a pastor and as a parent and as someone who wants to make Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County and the Wasatch Front a more harmonious place where we are diverse and free to live amongst each other with our differences, what are you anticipating having to... I think some people would be really fascinated, like as a parent, you and Christine, how do you help your kids grow as they grow up to understand some of the differences and what they might encounter in junior high, in high school?
Yeah. I think my parents did a great job of that, moving us out here, my sister and I, with very little context for what made us different. I think that they, at the ages that they revealed to us, different points of here's where we differ. When something would come up, or I'd hang out with neighborhood guys. And the second neighborhood we moved to was a lot more friendly. Or just getting older, and I mean your circles expand. I'm hanging out. I graduated from Intermountain Christian School, but I'm hanging out at Brighton High School's football game. So a lot of just secular friends outside of youth group, outside of my Christian school context. And so my parents would say, okay, now you're going to hear this about what they believe about Jesus and what we believe about Jesus, and what we plan to do and have already started doing is equipping our kids with the different belief structures while not villainizing those who are different than we are. One of the beautiful things, I just had a counseling session with somebody this morning where we were talking about the beauty of being plugged into the humanity of somebody's situation plugs you into the heart of God. And what I meant by that in this context was there are the scriptural rules of a certain thing that are right and just and true, and you can say, hey, you need to apply this and do this and just walk out of the room with this sense of black and white and definitiveness. Instead, those rules are rules for a real reason, a truth, and a purpose. But if we're in the humanity with somebody and we recognize that maybe this thing that they're struggling with is of great emotional pain, the quote unquote rules, and I hate using that word, but I can't think of a better one right now. The standards of Scripture and the standards of our Lord are meant to bring joy in life.
Yeah.
And we don't bash somebody over the head with them. We say, hey, it's almost like Joshua. I set before you today life and death. Choose life.
Yeah.
And so that's what we want to do. That's how we try to live. Is, let's take for instance, and if you ever watch this, Derek, I want you to know I love you very much. The bishop that we're gonna ride motorcycles with tonight. Man, I love that guy. I want his joy in his life, and I do believe that the Christ context, that we walk in would be of great value to him. Right. But I'm not going to bash him over the head that he doesn't agree with that right now and say, shape up, man. Yeah. I'm going to say, man, I love you. Yeah. And we'll continue
I hope he does watch this.
I hope
what you just said is powerful.
Okay.
And I can't imagine that he wouldn't be deeply touched by your affection and by your kind words, but also your acknowledgement that you have something that maybe he doesn't, or vice versa. He would probably think the same thing.
Yeah, I'm sure he
would.
Has
something that you don't have.
Yeah.
And that And our work, my work with Robert Millett from BYU, who's now retired, and we wrote a book together, and we did all these dialogues, and I've engaged with senior Mormon leaders for years. And I'll tell you, I have always said this line, and I think it's what you're demonstrating, and certainly what you're expressing, is we can talk about almost everything and anything better as friends than we can as enemies.
So true. Yeah, that's a great point.
I'm loaded with a wall of protection if I know you're coming after me.
Yeah.
I've got an answer before you even got your question finished.
Yeah. Right.
And I got the wall of protection up. But if you're my friend, I don't have to worry that you're trying to take a shot at me. You're not trying to undermine me. You're not trying to be rude or crude or unkind. I may not agree with you. But nonetheless, we can actually take that conversation to a place where we have to come to a point. I guess we disagree, and we're probably not going to convince each other today. So let's go ride bikes.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
Exactly.
But that, again, is something that I believe is a new gift that I'm going to say God has given the state of Utah and many Latter-day Saints and many evangelicals. There are still evangelicals that want to fight the Mormons or the LDS folks. There are still Latter-day Saints who want to fight evangelicals and Protestants as well. Yeah. And they're kind of on the periphery.
They are.
More so.
They are. They're minority.
And rightly so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
absolutely.
I think it's a better Utah when our kids can be friendly.
Yeah.
And so I was just thinking, and I went through this, so I'm talking about something I personally went through as a parent.
Okay.
So you got a young man, you got a little girl, but in about 10 years, they're going to want to date.
I don't want to think about this, Greg. Can we cut? I don't want to think about this.
So little Olivia comes to you and says, Daddy, this boy asked me to go to the prom. Or Caleb tells you, Daddy, there's this really pretty girl, and I want to go to her birthday party or whatever. And it seems like an innocent thing at first, but then there's a little affection going on. There's a little tension, and they want to be boyfriend girlfriend now. And how would you advise? And again, I think this is a tricky thing for evangelicals and Latter-day Saints to navigate.
Yeah.
Because again, I think our LDS parents are dealing with the same question in reverse. But how would you navigate your kids through the dating world?
Okay, so my question would be, I think that any seeking Mormon teenager should date a Christian because we'll steer them in the right direction. But the opposite is I'm kidding. Okay, and might I say, Greg, you're asking me this question. Admittedly, you just said 10 years too early.
Yes.
So I'm going to give you
I'm giving you a runway to
thanks. A runway to sound like an idiot, and I don't know what I'm talking about right now because I don't.
But you were in that realm.
Absolutely, I was. Absolutely, I was. Yes, and that came from me, just like it'll come from my kids, like it came from your kids. Yeah. So my simple answer is, this is going to bite me, man. They are forbidden.
Yeah.
Because the word is clear, the human heart is deceptive and wicked and looking to steer us in directions that we don't want to go. Having said that, we will absolutely give them the emotional and hopefully intellectual context for them to understand why this decision is so important. And why even at that age, because we know, hey, 16, man, nobody's getting married at 16. Unless, well, you're my mom, but she, that was strange. She married my dad at 17. That was the olden days, man. The pioneers did this, but so she doesn't watch this. But I would never villainize. Somebody be like, okay, so that girl is wicked.
Yeah.
That boy is trying to, to steer you in wrong directions. What I would say is we guard ourselves, and hopefully we live a lifestyle where they understand that mommy and daddy guard themselves.
Yeah.
I adore my wife. We have a healthy marriage, but man, I'm still a man.
Yeah.
She's still a woman, so we have safeguards around our covenant.
Yeah.
And so we're going to live a lifestyle that they can look at. I'll be able to point to that and say, we don't get to health accidentally. We put parameters around this, but I pray to show them specifically, not just in rules, but in testimony of power and lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like, these are the reasons why we follow what Jesus says is the best way to live. Yeah. And the best way to live is not going to be missionary dating.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a good phrase, and maybe our LDS friends would know that phrase, that to date someone outside of your faith,
right,
with the idea that if you fall in love and they want to remain with you, one of the prerequisites is you got to join my church.
Right.
That sets up a pretty a difficult thing. And most young people, whether they be 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, whatever, or up to about 25.
Yeah.
with guys, it's about 25 that their brains finally develop. Maybe women a few years earlier.
I was about 31.
Exactly. That you throw caution to the wind and you say, I don't care what I got to believe.
True.
I got to believe that rock over there is something I bow down to. If I get the girl, I'll do it.
True.
Vice versa. And nobody wants to see that.
Yeah.
No family that has embraced a faith, who has raised their kid in that faith, wants to see that be tossed just under the influence of romance.
Sure.
And kids who are thinking of romance at 16, 17, they're not thinking right. They'll throw everything to the wind.
Yeah.
So I think, again, frankly, what you just said is that caution. And again, if you don't agree, put some comments down below in the section on our YouTube channel that if you have different advice. But frankly, what we said to our daughters and our son was we want you to be friends with everyone and anyone in your school.
Yeah.
So pursue friendship. And if there are youth activities, a bunch of people are going to a pizza place, or they're going to mini golf, or they're going wherever, we welcome you to go as a part of a group activity.
Yeah.
But we don't want you to couple up.
Yeah.
And the reason is because your faith and the faith that we have raised you in, we believe is very important, and we want you to have a dating relationship with somebody that is like-minded in the way. Now, hey, that doesn't mean there can't be a pretending evangelical young man dating your daughter who has bad intentions.
Happens all the time.
And slips up and all that, or vice versa. Yeah. But ideally, and by way of principle, we're saying that we want our kids to date in their early development within their faith, and not outside of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the safest way of saying that.
Absolutely. So, would you assume that most Mormon families would feel that same way?
Absolutely.
I would think so too. Yeah.
It would be, it will happen. Again, we had situations where we found out that our daughter might be dating someone of the LDS faith, and we tried to, I thought we said this wasn't going to happen, and you have to work with that when it happens. It's real-time stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes that romance just, it takes over, and they will hide what they're doing from you.
Yep. That's a common story.
But I think that's something that, again, we are dealing with better today than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago.
I think so too.
Yeah. Let me turn corners in the remaining time that we have. So, as an evangelical, I would love our audience, be they LDS, be they evangelical, be they living in Utah or outside of Utah, to kind of hear from a pastor in Utah about what it's like to be a pastor in Utah as a non-Latter-day Saint. And again, you have the vantage point of seeing your dad go through this as a young man, as a kid, and then as associate, you kind of work close to your dad. So you've seen this, in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and now over the last 7 years, you are the senior leader of this church, and you're providing that leadership now. How would you, let's say somebody's watching this from, Detroit, Michigan, and they're moving to Utah next month, and they're hearing a pastor in Utah say what it's like to live in Utah. What is it going to be hard? Is it going to be weird? Is it going to be, what are the opportunities? So just kind of a little bit of a contemporary analysis from your perspective of what it's like for an evangelical or evangelical Christians to live in Utah.
Okay. I'll try to be as balanced in this as I possibly can. But recognizing and enunciating that my perspective is so biased in this. And what I mean by that is I love this place.
I do too.
I adore this place.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a more exciting time to be an evangelical and to be an evangelical leader, to have the honor of that than in this season. I'll say
in Utah or just generally?
No,
are you saying in Utah?
Oh, I'm talking about in Utah.
Okay,
I think in general as well,
totally
but
there.
in Utah specifically, because
yeah.
I mean this is where I'm playing my story out. And like I've said to you many times, man, it's going to take a burning bush to get me out of this place. I plan on landing the plane here because this is my tribe.
Yeah.
And even let's acknowledge some of the difficulties. There was a guy that used to come to this church that interestingly retired to Texas, but he would infrequently say to me, like after a Sunday morning he particularly enjoyed, Pastor Ken, man, I'm telling you, if we took a guy like you and put you in Dallas, you'd have a mega church.
Yeah.
And I know he was trying to give me a compliment, but then he moved to Dallas, I believe, someplace in Texas, and he still email me infrequently, be like, man, if we just find a guy like you, if we get in the door, so I mean, in our churches is modest, everything in Texas. Well, yeah, but what he's saying is, we serve very different demographics, and we do.
Absolutely.
So our church is modest, but I love it. I love even the what others would look at as the difficulties of serving our Lord and the kingdom of Jesus Christ in Salt Lake City, Utah, or in Utah in general. It's a different context. There are some, especially like you said, there's a real shift in culture. You grew up here as well. Spent a large. Well, I mean, you've been here for a long time.
Yeah, 33
is what I mean. So you understand. You see the differences from 30 years ago to today.
Yeah.
I would say those are good differences.
Yeah.
But even culturally, there have been plenty. We've had a lot of transplants come in here, and I I took our kids to youth camp a few weeks ago, and just took it. Well, I kind of was a bit of a selfish accepting of the responsibility. We had some people drop out last minute, and the last time I was at this same youth camp was the year I graduated high school, 1995.
Okay.
So I'm like, it'll be a reunion tour for Pastor Ken. I'll take our kids down there, and got to talk with a family that had just moved here from California, that go to our church now. They're youth are in our youth group, and just like seeing them kind of assimilate the differences. There are differences. There absolutely are. You said it yourself. The gentleman was President Ballard, or who had spoken. Hey, listen, our vernacular has to shift because not everybody understands. So they're talking. Hey, what does this mean? What does this mean? Having said that, I think that serving in Utah is so exciting right now because I am seeing, and if I'm going to get straight up evangelical, maybe even a bit Pentecostal right now, I see the Holy Spirit of God moving in powerful ways.
I agree.
That even it's a whole other podcast, but even the cleaning of house that we see in the overall body in this nation, and especially in some charismatic circles, because we know that the judgment of the Lord begins in the house of the Lord, right? Yeah. So I say, bring it, Lord Jesus.
Yeah.
You expose, you bring us to our knees, whatever needs to happen, because I want us to steward the move of God that I believe He wants to pour out.
Right.
I see people asking questions that I never would have thought they would ask.
Yeah.
Even neighbors, friends outside of the faith. To be like, could you tell me what this means? I had a very, very close friend of mine asked me very recently questions that I never thought would come out of this man's mouth. And he's saying, tell me about this.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has happened since COVID. I think a lot of people started asking some really deep questions about even like church attendance.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were forced to stay at home for a few months. We're allowed to go back, and we find ourselves asking, why?
Yeah,
why do I need to? Those questions followed through to a real answer are great to ask.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Christians, a lot of religious people are like, oh no, this really messed things up. Yeah. I think it's gotten us close to being very authentic inside the body of Christ. So yes, there are cultural differences. Yes, I'm very cognizant, and this will be different from a pastor in Dallas.
Yeah.
Every Sunday I get up to preach, I know there are visitors there who are of the Mormon faith.
Yeah.
Every single Sunday. So that's always in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
And I don't look at that as intimidating.
Yeah.
I look at it as like, okay, God, I've got this opportunity to speak. Let me speak well.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I know it's a bit ethereal and 30,000-foot view on that,
but
I remain, with all of our cultural differences, very excited to be a believer in Jesus Christ, a believer in the Jesus Christ of the Bible here in Salt Lake City, Utah.
I would concur, and I would say, it's interesting, we greet new pastors who are moving in and taking new ministry jobs and positions all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes when they arrive, they are on the defensive, and they might use language about them, those people, meaning the LDS people, and kind of being front heavy on the criticism and the negativity and the doctrine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take long, I think, particularly in our society now,
Yeah.
for them to also come back with, man, these are some of the most amazing people.
The best.
So, and like Daybreak is its own entity. I know
Sure.
that. It's a kind of a culture within a culture.
It's the
almost.
San Francisco of Salt Lake City. Let's be honest. Yeah.
But in our society, and I live right next door to an Orthodox Shia Muslim, and we do not agree on some major activities that are happening in the world today.
Sure.
But we're kind to each other. We're loving to each other. We're respectful to each other. As an evangelical Christian, I take issue with people on a whole host of different matters because of my faith and my belief. And our LDS friends know that there are theological differences as well. So the tool that I've been a proponent of for many, many years is the simple two-word response of convicted civility.
That's good.
And I think it really kind of comes at the heartbeat. I say this all the time. 1 Peter 3:15, be ready. Be ready who? Christian. Be ready. It's a command. Be ready. Be in a state of readiness to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. What a more positive way to call that. The disciple Peter says, for a hope that you have.
Yeah,
You have a
right.
hope inside of you.
Yeah,
Be
it's
ready to
awesome.
give an answer for why you have that hope.
Yeah.
Give if someone says, oh, you're a Christian, why? Oh, let me tell you,
Yeah.
Or you're a Christian, why would you ever believe in that kind of stuff, Well, let me tell you, I mean, instead of I don't know. That kind of, I haven't even thought about it myself, but,
Right.
but to be able to just simply go, oh man, thank you for that question. I love to tell you, I love Jesus Christ, and I believe He is the Son of God, and I believe He died on a cross and saved me. So you can jump right to that, and to declare that hope that lies within you. But always, sometimes we stop right there, but there's no period. There's just a comma. But always with gentleness and respect, and that's convicted civility.
Right.
So I will stand convicted of my belief system with my LDS friend, and attempt to be persuasive in a polite and courteous way.
Yeah.
I will allow them to be attempt to be persuasive to me in a polite and courteous way.
Yeah.
And that civility will soften, hey, totally, I don't agree with that, but I totally get what you're saying. Or, hey, if I were to restate what you're saying to me as your belief, would it be correct to say it this way? Okay, well, great, awesome. I still don't believe that,
Sure.
And so I think, for example, I literally just texted a very dear LDS friend of mine, a scholar in the LDS world, and I said, if there was a change that was announced in the LDS Church within the next 5 to 10 years, big or small, what do you think that change could be?
Okay.
Would it be a theological statement on grace, on the nature of God, on the nature of Scripture, on the understanding of people that are not LDS? And that is one of my big issues, and I think a lot of LDS people think the same way. The issue of one true church. Okay, so what does that mean? The LDS Church Scripture, the Doctrine and Covenants, does say this is the one true church upon the face of the earth. And the LDS Church believes that the restored gospel is the one true church, and therefore everybody needs to believe it or embrace it, either here or in the next life.
Yeah.
They believe in that opportunity beyond the grave.
Right.
We don't, but they do. And so there's that sense of our conviction of belief that if we I lost my train of thought there. Where was I going with that? Just that as we believe and as they believe, we want to express that with confidence and with the attempt to persuade.
Yeah.
But we don't want to do it with rudeness or lack of respect.
Right.
And I remember what I was going to say, this scholar, about is there something that could possibly be changed, and what do you think it could be? And he said, let me have a few days. I'm going to think about that. And I thought, because there are things that have changed in the LDS culture. I mean, when we were kids, it was heavy on the don't go to bad movies, don't smoke, drink, or go to dances or play with cards. That was kind of like what Christianity seemed to be in the 1980s.
The biggest points of the gospel right there, man.
Didn't sound like good news.
Right.
Sounded like a lot of rules.
You better not watch Braveheart.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go. And I snuck in to see Schindler's List because it was an R-rated movie.
Straight to hell, Greg.
Right. So anyways, I think it's been fascinating just to kind of get your bird's eye perspective as a pastor right here in Sandy, Utah, Midvale, Sandy area. Been here for a long time. You grew up here as a kid, high school, and went away for college, got married, have your own family now, and what you're bringing to the picture, what you're bringing to the table as a veteran pastor in your late 40s, mid to late 40s, where you're bringing that wisdom of experience and your generosity of personality into relationships that you have at Daybreak in your neighborhood. And the more that that's happening, the more that bishops and pastors are saying hi to each other and let's go on a motorcycle ride with our wives, the more we're eating lunch together, the more we're working together in common cause areas. I think I think of necessity, and here's my really big ultimate motivator is that if all human beings are seeking, if it is a goal of a human being to seek for truth, then I want to find it wherever it might be. I want to discover if there's anything in my life or thoughts or understanding of life in this world that's wrong or incorrect or harmful or not the best or not true at all. I want that to be exposed in my life. And so I want to pursue truth with a capital T, no matter where I find it. So if I sit with my LDS friend and they have something that I don't have and they explain it in a way that really makes sense, I want to thoughtfully consider that. I want to thoughtfully pray, but I want them to do the same. And that's not just an attempt to, make light of something. I mean, I think seriously, I want them to think about it, and I also want to think about it. So I think Utah in 2025 is a new place. Certainly, I mean, 30 years ago, no comparison. 20 years ago, not much of a comparison. 10 years ago, maybe we're making some shifts. But today seems like an exciting new day. We work with evangelical and LDS college students. So we do these dialogues in the spring break. We go to the Orem Institute of Religion. We go to the Cedar City Institute of Religion, St. George, Ogden, Logan, Salt Lake. And when their students, sometimes their choir will sing for us, or we'll have a worship team that will sing for them. We're sharing, Brandon Lake songs together, Gratitude. We're singing Chris Tomlin songs together. We're singing Lauren Daigle songs together. I'm like, how do they know these songs?
That's different, man.
That is not the LDS culture that I came from. I was raised in the LDS church until I was 14. We didn't sing their songs.
Absolutely.
And so that's been really cool. And I think that if anybody is listening and they're thinking about coming to Utah, it's this great state, this beautiful state, all these national parks and all this beautiful mountains and ski and all this skiing that we have, come here with a good attitude, not to take the land and destroy, but to build friendships and to make new acquaintances and to come with an open heart. And there's places for, if you're coming from the Catholic community, there are great Catholic churches. They're coming from the Protestant church, the evangelical church, there are great evangelical churches all along the Wasatch Front, all across the state of Utah.
Absolutely.
More so than ever before.
Very true.
There used to be a time like, don't want to move to that part of town. Don't move. It's like 99% LDS, so you won't fit there.
And you got one of 3 different churches to go to. If all of those aren't your cup of tea, then you're out of luck.
Right.
And not true anymore.
So anyways, great to have this conversation with you, Pastor Ken Kruger of the Mountain Church. You guys have church every Sunday morning, obviously.
Every Sunday morning, rain or shine.
10:30 service.
10:30 service,
And if anybody was looking for a church, they could certainly come here
Absolutely.
and check it out.
We'd love to host you and see what God says.
Exactly. So, hey, thanks for checking out Building Bridges, the podcast of Standing Together, and I'm your host, Greg Johnson. We've had a great conversation today. Always want to encourage you to consider liking, commenting, and sharing the podcast with other people as we kind of reignite this effort to use the podcast to advance building bridges in our community here in Utah. Good things are happening. We're so excited, and we'll see you next month, hopefully, for another edition of Building Bridges. God bless.